Good to go. All right, folks. You want to kick this off? Yeah? All right, we're doing it. All right, I'm Jerod Brennen. I'm here out of Columbus. I work for a company right now, SailPoint, that sells software, identity governance, identity and access management. I went to school to be a music teacher and ended up in this career because I wanted to make money, and I wasn't making a whole lot of money. I didn't go into teaching. I love teaching. I don't love helicopter parents or all the bureaucracy that comes from public schools. My wife taught for 10 years. She loves it. Not for me. But after kind of poking around, looking for things I like to do, I've always liked computers. I've always liked tech. I got into an IT job doing hardware, which led to a call center job, which led to an enterprise job, American Electric Power, out of Columbus. Got pissed off at my boss, and instead of quitting the company, I quit his team and went to work for a security team. The requirements for the security team were that I understand Unix command line. That was it. If I knew how to do LS right, how to check Etsy password, then I was more qualified than the other folks on the team, and they needed that skill set. When I was there, I got bored with that job kind of quick, and recruiters said, hey, Abercrombie & Fitch wants somebody to come build a PCI compliance program. PCI is all credit card security, so what I found out when I started interviewing for the job, they weren't very much interested in the security side of it, but if they couldn't prove that they were following all these rules, their bank was going to charge them more like a higher percentage fee per credit card transaction. So it was strictly to save money, which meant I got the job, and then it was an uphill battle because a lot of folks didn't want me there. They thought I was just going to slow things down. It was a very different culture, so I had to learn how to do security differently than I did it at the utility. A public utility, culture of no, right? They're very risk averse. If somebody screws up, you've got a meltdown in a nuclear plant. At Abercrombie, they just sold t-shirts. So they didn't care. I had one instance where somebody stood up. I mean, in the way the office is set out, all these tables and big long, like there were maybe 15 desks of 6 people to a desk. And somebody just yelled, hey, what's the local admin password? I need to install something. And somebody else yelled it back. It was 6 characters, all lowercase. And if you poked around as a hacker, you could figure it out pretty easy. I mean, aside from just the guesswork, you'd be able to get it. But spent a few years there building out a security program before I had a chance to go into consulting, where instead of running this stuff day to day, it was my job to teach other people how to do it. To talk to people to figure out what are you trying to accomplish in terms of security. Let's figure out, kind of step back, how to get where you want to be from where you are. Spent a little time at OSU doing risk assessments and helping to build out an internal red team to do pen testing in-house. Back into consulting before I landed in the vendor space. So what you're going to hear through this talk is a combination of this is what it's like to do this stuff day to day. This is what the consulting piece is like, where I did a lot of pen testing. And then this is what it's like to secure it using vendors and technology, whether open source or whatever. This is part 1 of a 3-part series of talks. You can find the other 2 on YouTube under on my YouTube channel. There's a guy who goes around and records talks, so the others are out there. This one is all about what we did back when I was pen testing to get into organizations. Let me do this.
Maybe you have to click back onto the...
Oh yeah, you're right.
That was my bad.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, that's enough about me. One of the reasons I like this talk so much, I don't know if you've ever read The Art of War. I've read it a couple of times, Sun Tzu. If you want to understand your enemy, you have to think like your enemy. You have to do the bad stuff in order to understand how to defend yourself against the bad stuff. So I'm not sharing this information with the hopes that you go out and abuse the knowledge that you're going to get today. I'm sharing this information so that if you end up somewhere where you're trying to help people figure this out, you know what the bad guys are going to do. F5, does anybody know the name of that vendor? Recognize it, right? Network security vendor. Bigger company, they did a report 2017, I think they released like December of 17, where they looked at hundreds of data breaches and said, we just want to know, what did the bad guys do to get in? What was the first thing the bad guys did? And what they found from, it was like 600 different data breaches, there were two things that attackers are going after again and again. Application security weaknesses and identity and access management weaknesses. If companies can figure those two things out, they're going to shut down that initial attack vector and keep the attackers from getting in. When I was doing one of the pen tests for a company out of Columbus, I was looking at their network from the outside and found a PBX administration web interface. You know what PBX is? I had to look it up. I did not know when I hit it. It's their phone system. So they were using an older phone system. They had a web app for managing that entire system, and you could get to the web app from the internet. When you are pen testing, one of the easiest things you can do is Google for the admin guide. Any technology you find, Google for the admin guide, and if there's older tech on the network, look up the default admin password, which I did and I used, and I got into this system from the outside. So number one, they shouldn't have had it exposed outside. Number two, they should have changed that password. Ideally, you know, if you're going to expose something externally, you should have multi-factor in front of it. A lot of things they could have done to prevent it. But because they didn't, I was able to get in by exploiting an identity and access management weakness. As I'm poking around the admin guide, I found a button in the app that said netstat. And when I clicked on the button, it kicked back all the connections to the box that I was connected to. Right? If you guys have done any command line, you know that netstat is a command line tool. So I'm thinking, well, what if I could intercept that command? Can I send other commands to this server that the app didn't intend? So I used Burp Suite. They've got a proxy tool you put on your box, and then you route all your traffic through that tool. And so when I clicked the netstat button, I caught that request, and I changed it and said, instead I want to send cat/etsy/password. And the results, instead of all the active connections to the box, were the contents of the Etsy password file, which Etsy password doesn't have any plain text passwords, but it has every username that I can use to get on that box. But more importantly, now I knew I could send any command that I wanted to on that server. I could run that server like I was root in-house from this web app from the outside because of an application security weakness that I could only exploit because they didn't have the identity weaknesses squared away. So F5 did this research, and you know, you take a look at it and say, well, they're trying to sell something. Of course, they're going to try to make the story sound good, but as a pen tester, I've used these exact techniques. I have seen this in the real world. Oops. When we're looking at organizations, unfortunately, there's only so much that organizations can hide. Does anybody do OSINT gathering, open source intelligence gathering? OSINT gathering is a lot of fun, and you can get away with it because you don't need permission to do it. OSINT is all information that's in the public domain. You can take it and collect it. It's when you act on it that you should look up local, state, and federal laws to make sure you're not crossing any lines. There's a lot of user information online that you can get if you're going to go after a company. Admin guide aside, just spend some time on LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn, you can find every employee at a company that you're targeting who's active and has an account that's going to have access to sensitive information. System info has to be available. The whole way the internet works is DNS and routing and all this technical information that lets your phone, your tablet, your laptop understand how to talk to a server and the server to send the information back. You, as a defender, right, as you're trying to keep people out, you can't hide that information, right? If you hide your main website, your customers can't get to it. So you've got to leave some information exposed. And companies have shifted over the last few years where they're relying more and more on apps that don't live in their data center. So there are these things that they're trusting somebody else is doing security right. And if they're not, it leaves the company open to have that data stolen from that app, or the application security weakness is exploited if they're not doing security well. Has anybody heard of the Marriott Breach? Do you remember there was a story about a year ago about the Marriott hotel chain? Right? So when they discovered the Marriott Breach, they also discovered something very upsetting, which was how long the attackers were actually on the network. Does anybody know how long the attackers had been camping out before they were caught? 4 years. Yes, it's insane. How much information were they able to collect from 4 years? That's an entire high school career, entire college career of just sitting on the network, watching, stealing, and then doing whatever they want. This is a trend that attackers are shifting toward. Instead of just coming in and stealing everything and leaving, if I can camp out and you don't know I'm there, and if I've got access to get to things that I should have access to get to, I'm going to keep siphoning things off until you catch me. And at that point, I'll be doing just fine. This is the actual step-by-step technique that we use. And Logan has these slides. So if you want this stuff after today's talk, please take it. We would do pen test at the company I worked for most recently. And I had a guy, Mike. Mike is a former prison guard from up in Mansfield. I don't think he ever fought MMA, maybe some amateur. But then he flipped over to hacking from he's a gray hat, but he's on the up and up, but he's about as gray gets. I would sit on pen tests with Mike, and he would go from unauthorized outsider to domain administrator by lunchtime on Monday. Every test we set on, I could count on Mike to get in. It was just a question of how quickly could he do it. And when he's going after somebody, and we've got like 2 weeks to do a pen test, and he's in on Monday, he spends the rest of the time just pillaging the internal network. I've seen him come away. He had a terabyte hard drive that he filled up on one pen test because he got into their VM environment and took all their virtual machines. And he left and he said, Jerod, I don't have any room for anything else, so I'm just going to go ahead and call it a day. This is how Mike gets in. And I want to point out, Mike doesn't actively scan somebody's network. He collects open source intelligence. He collects publicly available information about the company. He finds people who works for the company, LinkedIn, and then he launches, I'll talk about password spraying. He launches a password spraying attack to try to get in from the outside using a known password, not necessarily a weak password, but a known password. And then once he's in, it's all about you establish persistence, right? I want to get my feet in the system, and then I want to move laterally, right? I want to take over a box, and then I want to take over another box, and that way when they find my one account on the one box, I've still got 10 other boxes that I'm on. But this is the process that he followed. The reason I wanted to share this is because criminals follow a process. They're not just guessing, they're not just poking around. They've collected things that work. They share that information, and then they build a process to increase the likelihood of their success. Makes it harder for defenders. The other thing that's concerning is that the things criminals are doing are not new. Password spraying was first written about back in 2016, so we're coming up on 4 years from when Black Hills published their blog on password spraying. I was doing it was kind of incident response, kind of forensics for a large company here in Dayton. They were attacked, and they felt that they caught the attack. Their security information event management system looked like it shut it down and told them about it. But they wanted somebody to take a look and just be sure. They want to make absolute certainty that nobody got in. So they sent me the information, and as I'm going through the data, I found an IP address that was hosting like a Perl script, a Python script, I don't remember what it was. It was some shell script. And so I fired up a virtual machine, and I went out to that IP and I downloaded that script so that I could read through it. In that script, I found comments where the developer of the script was talking smack about the people who originally wrote the script. So it was like one criminal organization wrote it, another one came along and made it better and couldn't resist talking about how garbage the first group of criminals were. But if you've got comments, those comments are a static string. So I took the comments, plugged them into Google. I found a hit going back 8 years before the incident, which means this script had been floating around with the comments talking smack for 8 years. When attackers find something that works, they're going to reuse it and reuse it and reuse it until it stops working. If they're making money, then they're going to keep at it. But I'm a fan of simplicity. There is a way. It's not all doom and gloom. So I want to talk through this stuff in a bit. Where I work right now, all I do is identity. I talk about joiner, mover, leaver activity. I talk about giving people access and taking it away, controlling privileged accounts. The trends that we're seeing, not just at our company, but just throughout the industry, are that people are trying to figure out how to get this identity thing right, to make sure the right people have access to the right things at the right time, which shuts down a lot of this stuff. Even if the attackers get in, they can't go anywhere. I've got some information in here that I'm just leaving after. I'm not going to spend a lot of time during the talk going through it, but understanding the language you use when talking about identity internally helps you have the conversations with the people who are trying to fix this, helps you connect with them. When we talk about joiner, mover, leaver activity, any time somebody comes into a company or starts working for a company, I'll tell you a story on this later, they create an account, which isn't just employee accounts, but it could also be customer accounts. If you can go out to any website and self-register, then it's a joiner event, right? You now have an account mapped back to your identity associated with their system. When people work at a company and move around, that's what a mover event is, right? Things change. That's where the one person who started working at the company 10 years ago and has had all these different jobs has way too much access because nobody took away the stuff when they moved from one job to the next. They just keep piling it on, and when their account gets compromised, the attacker is able to do a lot more than they should. And then the last lever, you need to be shutting off accounts when people don't work there anymore. All right. So I worked at I'll keep this general because I know it's being recorded. I worked at an organization where I was doing risk assessments for software as a service apps, third-party apps. And what I would do when I'm testing the security of these apps, I set up a regular user account so I can just poke around. I couldn't do pen testing, I couldn't do scanning, but I could log in as a regular user and just use it. I left this organization, and 2 years later, in my LastPass vault, I still had a folder with all the usernames and passwords I used to log into these apps. I shouldn't have, but I went through one by one and tried to log in again and say, can I get to things that I'm not supposed to get to because people forgot to turn off my account? I found 4 different apps that I was able to get in. One of the apps, the password was the number 1. So there was no complexity, no upper, lower. It's because the vendor wasn't doing a good job on application security. They weren't enforcing, or identity access management. They weren't enforcing password complexity. But I had people at that company tell me, when you leave, we're going to turn off your access to everything. And I had 4 pieces of evidence to say, you're not doing what you said you were doing. If I was malicious, I could get in and do harm through any one of those 4 attack vectors. That's what a leaver event is. When I'm not there anymore, take away all my access. I do want to mention this. How many folks here have heard of OWASP? All right, has anybody heard of the IDSA? Good, I like it. Yeah, there you go, we just talked about it. IDSA is like OWASP year 1 for identity. So OWASP is all about application security and about helping you figure out how to do web app security and mobile app security. IDSA is all about helping you figure out how to do identity. They're a very new organization. They're not even 2 years old, but they've got a pretty active community. You can go online and get involved. If you want to get into this identity stuff, check them out. It's something that you should definitely keep your eye on. But then the one last thing I want to share before we go into the attacks, when you are either doing pen tests or you're securing an organization, it's helpful if you understand who does what at a company. The help desk is going to be one of the most high-profile targets at the company, not the CEO. CEO doesn't have access to shit. The help desk has access to everything. And when an attacker comes in, they might look at the CEO and go, yeah, that's a big name, but if I can get into the help desk and get an account that can create accounts and reset passwords, boy, I can do a lot of damage with that account instead. You're going to have maybe like a SOC who is watching all this activity when you're launching an attack. It's good to know what capabilities am I up against. Are they going to see me do this? And then the security team is going to be the one that gets into this stuff in the weeds, and they're going to be the ones you're going to want to work with to actually secure this stuff after. But let me get a quick drink, and then we get to talk about the fun stuff. I am a huge advocate of open source intelligence gathering. Every company should be doing this on a regular basis. I've written courses on LinkedIn. I've written courses on Pluralsight. If you know that website, my 2 courses on Pluralsight are it's like 9 hours of OSINT gathering, 5 hours for targeting companies and 4 hours for targeting individuals. This is the one slide version of the tools that I use on every pen test. When I'm targeting an organization and I want to know what systems they have on the internet, I'm going to go to Shodan. John, the guy who runs Shodan, super cool. He's done an incredible job, and it's an incredibly useful tool to the point that I actually bought licenses so I could get some extra stuff. But you can, if you set up a free account, you can do a ridiculous amount for free. When you set up an account, you'll be able to use the org modifier. So it's like a Google search, but you type in org : and then in double quotes the name of the company you're going after. And if it finds a match on that string, it'll give you a list of all the systems associated with that organization. It's a quick way. If you go www.company.com and just do like an NS lookup and find out what IP address maps back, then chances are you can use that information to figure out what the name of the organization is, and then find all their systems in Shodan. Census is kind of like Shodan, but it's all about web services and SSL and TLS certificates. So one of the things I like to do is look within SSL and TLS certs and see how many different servers they've applied that cert to. Like star.company.com is a wildcard cert for everything, but when you get into a company that doesn't want to manage a whole bunch of certs, they'll take one, but they'll put all their server names in the SSL cert, the TLS cert. And so if you look that cert up on Census, then you can see all these servers. And again, you've not scanned their network. You haven't touched their network at all. Between Census and Shodan, you're going to have a good idea of all the computers that they have on the internet, maybe even some that shouldn't be on the internet. Find subdomains. The other tool I've started using recently, DNS Dumpster. I don't like, DNS Dumpster, it's incredibly accurate. I don't like their presentation, Matt. I feel like they could do a better job of organizing the search results, which is why I like Find Subdomains. Although they keep changing it, and I don't like the last round of changes they made either, so I'm just sitting here complaining about free stuff. Find subdomains. If you plug in company.com, like a top-level domain, it'll tell you all the subdomains that are mapped in like different DNS entries, mail entries. But with all that information now, even if I don't have an IP address from Shodan or Census, I've got a reference to a box from the subdomain list. Hurricane Electric's BGP toolkit. Anybody know BGP? Border Gateway Protocol. It's just a way to route traffic on the internet, a way for the computers to talk to each other. The whole concept of neighbors in BGP is kind of a big deal. When you find one computer that belongs to your target organization, chances are they've got other computers right next to it in the IP addressing scheme. So BGP toolkit's a good tool to complement the other things you found. What's an SPF record? Who knows what that is? All right, Logan, what's an SPF record? You've heard of it. All right.
It's for Sender Policy Framework.
Send, and what's it do, Matt?
It basically will tell other places on the internet using Keymark what domains are allowed to send email as another domain, or what IPs are allowed to send as a specific domain.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a security, an email security tool that allows people to send email on your behalf, but more importantly, it shows you as a pen tester who they trust. If I trust you enough to let you send email on my behalf, you might have a record for me in your SPF record. And when you're targeting a company, you want to understand not only what systems and subdomains are in scope, but you want to understand who they trust. Because this opens up a lot of those software as a service relationships, a lot of third-party relationships. I use those 5, 6, if you add DNS Dumpster, And you do all this information again without ever touching the target network, which means they don't know you're doing this. You're not going to trigger any alerts. You're not going to set off any alarms. They'll have no idea you're doing this. Then I flip it over to people. LinkedIn has been a godsend for pen testers. I use LinkedIn a lot. Professionally, that's how I stay in touch with people. When I write something, I share it out. When I do a presentation, I talk about it. I've been talking about this B-Sides event on LinkedIn for like 2 weeks. So LinkedIn is a great place to find the names of all these people you want to go after at a company, because ultimately you're going to want an email address, right? I'm logging into different web interfaces. If I've got an email address, there's a chance the email address is going to be the username. If I can figure out the names of people at the company and their email address structure, that's a ton of useful information. Hunter.io is what I use to figure out their email address structure. It's actually a sales and marketing tool. It's not a security tool at all. But if you go out to Hunter, people have exchanged information. This person works at this company. Here's their email address. And if it gets enough email addresses, it says, we think the email address structure for this company is first initial dot last name at company.com, first name, last name at. And so all you have to do is figure out that structure, go to LinkedIn, and then take all the names, and then just a quick Excel spreadsheet, you can build them all out, right? A small Python script, and you've got your whole list. Pastebin is where I go to find people who've already been hacked and don't know it. Pastebin is where attackers will share information about compromised accounts and say, you know, if you submit Bitcoin to this wallet, I'll give you the full dump, but here's 1,000 to prove I've got the goods. That 1,000 is good data, it's legit data. So you can find weaknesses, you can find information out there. I was actually doing a pen test for a large organization in Texas, and on Pastebin, I found a woman's company email address associated with a website that had nothing to do with the company. So she had used her company email to sign up for something personal, and she used for the password, it was like Charles. It was a man's name, a male name. And when I did some OSINT gathering around social media, I found out that Charles was her oldest son. So even though that website let her use 6 characters, all lowercase, no complexity, for a password, I couldn't use that against her corporate site because they were enforcing strong passwords. But if I know she's in the habit of using her kids' names as passwords, what am I going to try? Charles 19 exclamation point, right? Capital C, that would meet all the complexity requirements. So you find a lot of good stuff on Pastebin. Intel Techniques, unfortunately, earlier this year, the guy who runs the site had to pull a lot of his tools off the website. He had a site that you could go plug in one piece of information, click go, and it would open up dozens of tabs that all had useful OSINT, but people got mad, and he took enough flack that he took those tools offline. But he does have Buscador, which I think I'll talk about later. It's a virtual machine, like a Kali Linux, but it's only for OSINT gathering. So he's still doing some cool stuff. The tools aren't quite as robust as they were. ReconNG and Discover are 2 scripts that I recommend every pen tester have in their toolbox. I think ReconNG, you guys know Kali Linux, the pen testing tool. I think Recon's built into Kali now. Discover I don't think is, but it should. Discover actually uses Recon as one of its inputs. All this stuff I just talked about doing manually, ReconNG and Discover do with, like, I can't say a click, it's all command line. But you plug in a company name, you plug in a domain name, you click enter, and it gets all the info for you, all the OSINT. OSINT gathering should be step 1 when you're trying to exploit these weaknesses. The other tools that get into passive, or what is it, semi-passive intelligence gathering, where you're touching the websites, you're touching the systems, but you're not doing anything malicious, right? I like to pull down all the documents that are publicly available and then run through the metadata to see what I can find. You'll find usernames, like network usernames in metadata, stuff that you can't find in email address, the OSINT gathering. I found print server names, I found IP addresses. The FOCA tool actually looks for passwords. I've never been fortunate enough to find a password in the metadata. But you know, metadata for folks, right? You've got what you can see in the doc, and then all the descriptive stuff that helps the program that opens the doc understand who made it, when did they make it. There's a lot of good info in metadata. This was practicing for a test. There's a tool, I don't have it, it's called Creepy. It's an OSINT gathering tool that pulls metadata from photos. I configured it with the right API keys on my Linux box, pointed it at my wife's Twitter account, and had a history of every place we had been as a family for the past 5 years, with like a heat map to show, yeah, their kids spent a lot of time at this school and they went on a vacation here, and it was all geotag pics that I thought she had turned off. But so when you're gathering this OSINT, some of the things you're going to look for when you identify the technology that's in play, look for the admin guides, right? DuckDuckGo, Google, either of these. I know some people use Bing, it's out there, but whatever website you use to find things on the internet, pull back the admin guides tied to the vendor technology and the version. It's incredibly helpful. Look for new hire information. When somebody starts at the company and the help desk is tired of getting calls about how do I set up VPN, how do I log in from the outside, they'll put stuff online that they should not put online. Now, users need a way to get that information, but a PDF on the internet that says, here's how to log into VPN, here's your default password, should not exist. They still do, but they shouldn't. You're gonna wanna look for that. You're gonna wanna look for the usernaming convention again in the metadata. And then I recommend starting with a list of all the login portals. Anything HTTP, ideally HTTPS. 8443 is really popular in terms of ports. 443 is your traditional SSL, but 8443 tends to be reserved for administrative tools. It's just like a vendor habit. There's no rhyme or reason for it, but it's a great place to start. You want to find how do I log into webmail? How do I log into SSL VPN? And is there a password self-service tool, which I'll talk about in a sec. The easiest way to get into an organization by exploiting identity and access management weaknesses is password spraying. So the old way of targeting accounts was I'm going to get a user or like one username. I'm going to get a password dump. Like the RockU list is what, 550. What are we up to now? Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned is like 500 million password hashes of known compromised passwords, right? Just take the top 100. I would throw like a repeater where the one username, try this one, doesn't work. Try this one, doesn't work. Companies got wise to that and said, look, you can log in 5 times. If you get your password wrong 5 times, you're done. I'm going to lock your account. You're not going to get to try the rest of your password list. Password spraying flips that on its ear and says, I'm going to take all those email addresses I got from LinkedIn. I'm going to take all the usernames I got from the document metadata. And I'm going to just try one password against every username in that list. The most popular password right now, winter 2019 exclamation point. Capital W, lowercase INTER 2019. I hope, yeah, I don't want to know. If it's your password, don't tell me. But it meets all the complexity requirements. It's at least 8 characters, upper, lower, special, alphanumeric. And when I get that prompt to change it in 90 days, spring 2020, right? This is what users are kind of the corner we back them into by requiring these crazy complex passwords that they can't possibly remember. Users are smart. They figure out a way to do their jobs within these security restrictions. So if I get all these email addresses from Hunter and from LinkedIn, I'm going to try that password, right? I'll try like Go Flyers. I'll try Houday. I'll try Go Bucks. I'll try Brutus, right? You got to get your head inside what the people are likely to be using as a password. And then you use a NTLM botherer, which is a Python script against like a Microsoft interface. Almost everybody's got some Microsoft thing on the internet. You find the interface and bother. This one went against link, but so the URL might be different now. But or you could use Burp. Burp Suite, the intruder tool, lets you emulate the same functionality. It takes a little more configuration. It's not just Python script and go, but it gets the job done. Once you're in, the tools I recommend you play around with in your home labs, Mimikatz, Kerberos, and PowerShell Empire. They're all 3 Windows-centric tools. You will find people who aren't using a lot of Microsoft on the internal network. I know a company in Columbus who doesn't have a Microsoft domain. They're a fairly new startup. They're a few years old, but they don't have a lot of stuff on the inside. Everything is software as a service, so you'd be out of luck there. But if you get inside and use these tools, you're going to get hashes, You're going to be able to jump from whatever box you've compromised to other boxes on the network. And then there's a tool called PowerUp that I dig. It looks on a Windows box for the security tools that have elevated privileges, like antivirus, right? You might have a user running restricted privileges, but the AV agent has to be able to see everything to do everything it does. So what PowerUp will do is it'll bounce that agent and add a command at the end of the startup string to try to create accounts, to try to sync its hooks into that system. And there are some AV vendors who I have seen, I think they fixed it since then, but they fell to that in one of our pen tests. Social engineering is always going to work. You are always going to be, I'm a privacy advocate. I've been a paid paranoid for 2 decades. I fell for a phishing attack at one of the companies I worked for because I had just started at the company and didn't have a lot of vacation time. And my wife said, hey, our son's graduating. Our oldest son was graduating high school, and we were real good friends, still friends with the families. And they were going to go on a cruise. And she's like, I want to go on the cruise with them. It should be a big extended family. We should all go. And I said, I'd love to. I don't have any vacation time. I talked to my boss. He said, look, that's important. You do that. I'll handle HR. We'll figure it out when you get back. I got back, and I shit you not, in my mailbox was a, hey, you've been using vacation time you don't have. Click here to provide justification. And I clicked on that button, and it said, oh, this is a phishing email. You should not. It was a company internal, right? Security awareness. And when I'm talking to the guys in IT, they're like, Jerod, why did you click on that? We don't even have a tracking system. It was about as fake could be. I'm like, I just started at the company, and I have kind of taken some liberties with my vacation time. It was a perfect storm. And so people will get hit with social engineering, going after user accounts, even if somebody says, we got 2-factor. You don't have to worry, you can't get in without 2-factor. The date on this tweet, June 4th, 2016. So for years, the idea of going after people through their 2-factor, right? Figuring out how they do 2-factor, conditioning them to say, hey, you're going to get a notification. This is your IT department. We're just testing the 2-factor system. When you get that pop-up that says, is this you? Just click yes and move on. People will fall for that. They want to be helpful. So you want to incorporate, excuse me, social engineering into your testing too, because it will help you get around some of the more tricky controls. Does anybody know who this guy is? He is, or was, the physician for the current president of the United States. I have circled a sticky note on his monitor. This is his Facebook profile picture. Now, I pulled that pic down. It's a public profile. I tried to blow it up. I could not read what was on it, but what do you think is on it? Yeah, in all likelihood, and we've seen like ESPN, there was the Hawaii missile test. There have been a lot of examples where people will be on TV and they're doing a cool in-location interview, and you see the Wi-Fi password or some password on the whiteboard in the background. And this guy's profile pic, I mean, what happens if somebody gets his access? At this point, I don't know, but I'm not going into that. We're at a whole nother level of crazy with that today. But when you're social engineering, bring physical social engineering into play. Hey, I'm here with building management. We're just doing an inspection of the fire extinguishers. I just need to walk around each of the floors to make sure everything's current. Oh yeah, go ahead. Right, I had a guy I worked with, big guy, like 6'4", rugby player. He bought a UPS uniform online, and he would go in and he would play big, clumsy, and dumb at the desk. He would knock stuff over, like he couldn't even control his own body. People would get so pissed off, they'd be like, look, just go. Just whoever you got to give the package to, go ahead, I'll take care of this. And he used that to get back to the front desk multiple times. Phone calls, if you get to call the help desk or pretend to be the help desk, hey, this is so-and-so, I'm traveling internationally, I forgot my password, can you reset it for me? Right? Most help desks should be trained not to fall for this, but if you catch the one new person who hasn't gone through that training yet, you might be able to get them to set a password for whatever account you're going after. Does anybody use the Social Engineers Toolkit at all? A little bit. It's baked into Cali. It's Dave Kennedy, Trusted Sec. This is his baby. You can use the site cloner tool to point at any website and create a fake version of that website that looks just like the real one. So create that, right? LinkedIn.com. Register linked and the number 1n.com. Point the site cloner tool at the LinkedIn login page, and then send an email to everybody saying, hey, we've had to reset your password. Click here to enter your new password, and then get just one person to fall for it. It's going to look and feel kind of like it should. If you can catch one unsuspecting user, you can get in. It's a great tool to use in that social engineering attack. I like social media. I'll be honest. I've had to pull back from Twitter because I don't like getting in fights with people. I saved that for Facebook. That's where I have all my arguments about politics and religion. LinkedIn, I keep it professional, but every platform has a way that they try to make it fun and engaging for users. And these quizzes are the bane of every security professional's existence, right? There's what was your royal wedding name when the royal wedding was a big thing. And one of the questions in the royal wedding name was like your paternal grandmother's middle name. It's silly, but when you look at all the options for password reset questions, does anybody know the formula for your porn star name? It's yep. Yep, your first pet and the street you grew up on, which mine is, I won't go into it because I don't want to give you any answers, but it works. It works on both angles. If you go out to somebody's social media profile and you just go through and look for all the answers for their secret question, or I'm sorry, their social quizzes, you'll be able to reset their password on multiple websites. I actually did this during a pen test, company out of New York. We were hammering away at their environment, and I found their password reset portal and figured out that if I went to the portal and started the process and then tried it twice and failed, they would kick me out. They would shut the person's access off for the portal. They could still do their job, they just couldn't reset their password externally. But if I went to see what the two questions were and then hit the back button and then went to see what the two questions were, they would change every time I went. So I do that about 10, 20 times. I got the whole list. I know every secret question. And then I just have to find two, right? If I know the answers to two questions, then I'm just going to keep doing that until those two come up, enter them and get in. So I was doing this for a company. The first year I didn't get in, and I told them, I said, highly recommend that you make some changes to how people are doing the password reset here because you're susceptible to attack. I didn't get in this year during this 2-week pen test, but next year, if you come back to us, I'm going to do it. And they came back to us next year, and on day one of the pen test, I skirted my rules. Instead of doing all the intelligence gathering, I went right after that portal. I found a network admin who in every social media profile was wearing a New York Giants jersey, every single one. One of his favorite his password reset questions, what's your favorite sports team? I should have been able to get in with that one, but you got to think, is it Giants? Is it NY Giants? Is it New York Giants? The computer just wants a string, and I ended up locking his account out, so no luck. I went after an IT director, and what I'll recommend for you folks here, mylife.com and familytreenow.com. Go to those two websites, see what they know about you. I was sitting on the couch with my wife playing around with these sites, and I've known my wife, we've been married 21 years, 21 and a half, and we knew each other 10 years before we got married. That's the majority of my life, she and I have known each other. We don't have secrets between us. I found a name tied to her on Family Tree Now, and I'd never heard it before. So I said, Corey, who's this person? And she thought for a second, she goes, oh my God, that was my babysitter when I lived at this house when I was 5 years old. She's like, what are you doing? How do you know that person's name? I say, don't worry about it. It's amazing that we're still married after 21 years. But you use these websites, you find out where people grew up, you find out all their addresses, you find out their family members, and then you use that information in the password reset. I was able to get an IT director at this company during the pen test. I was able to get the year he graduated high school, which was one of his secret questions. And then there was another secret question. What was your favorite toy as a child? I thought, man, that's a tricky one. I'll never be able to get that. But poking around online, I found that this guy had his own website. He was in IT. He was comfortable making and setting up his own website. It was all about Legos. Building Legos, right? So I go back to the reset portal, LEGOS, enter, what do you want your new password to be? And I was able in the middle of the day, and this was the thing I didn't like. The company made us only test from 8 to 5. So as soon as I change somebody's password, they're going to know. So I had all the tabs open of email, external VPN, which was not two-factor. And as soon as I changed the password to a value I knew, I went into every one of those portals, pillaged as much as I could in 15 minutes. And then I called my contact and said, Mike, you're going to be pissed. But I told you I was going to do it, and here's what happened, and here's the guy who's going to be calling you in a little bit. And they were able to, they had to do their damage control internally, but it works, folks. If people need things they can remember, right? If we're going to put this control on them, if you use these social media quizzes, you'll be able to get around that as well. If you can get in an app as an end user, you can take over the entire app in some cases. I found this out at a company in Columbus doing a very specific web app pen test, just one app. It's the app that all of their customers use, and their customers have the ability to set up their own username and password. So I went into this app, set up my own username and password, and then I brought up Burp, and I was looking at all the traffic that was happening behind the scenes. I could only see a little bit in the browser, but behind the scenes, there's a lot. And in the URL, they were using Drupal, which had some big vulnerabilities, but I wasn't trying to do that. I was trying to do an application level exploit. And the way Drupal works is it'll say like URL/user/number/edit. And it's whatever your database identifier is, that number. So what did I do? I went to that URL in the browser and I changed the number, right? If I'm 1234 and I want to see somebody else's account, I try 1233. I know there has to be one before me or they wouldn't be at 1234. In trying this, I found that not only was I able to see other accounts, I was able to change other passwords. So this told me one at a time, I could go through every account in this application, which was tens of thousands. I wasn't going to do it, but I could change any password I want. So I went all the way back to 0. In Drupal, 0 is the super admin account. It's the account that has got access to everything. And I tried to change that password and it said, Jerod, that's stupid. We're not going to let you change that. I got like an error message saying you are not allowed to change that account's password in this web interface. So I started going up. 1, no, there was an account. 2 was an account. 3 still existed. 3 belonged to the application administrator who originally deployed this application years ago. What level of access do you think that person had to the app? Yeah, and now I had his account. I was able to change it. So if you can get into an application that allows you to self-register accounts, do it. Because just looking at all that app traffic is going to open up possibilities for how you can get in. When you're on the internal network, has anybody played around with Responder? Yeah, if you're on a Windows network, do it. What it does is anytime a box on the network says, hey, I'm looking for X, right? The way TCP/IP works, your computer will say, hey, that's me, what do you want? And so this can be a bad thing, so be careful if you're doing this in a corporate environment because all of the network traffic on your LAN is suddenly going to go through your laptop. And if your laptop can't keep up, you will cause a DOS attack internally. That had happened at that guy I was telling you about, Mike, the pen tester, that when he was learning this tool, he did that accidentally. But it's a great tool to have in your toolkit because, again, once you get on the network, you want to impersonate and try to collect all that information. So add that one as well. And then keep in mind, it's just literally all the stuff I've talked about, one set of credentials. We did a pen test once where password spraying against a company that had a really large contractor contingent. Non-employees, temporary workers should not have access to a lot of things. We got 3 sets of credentials. Went in through, in this case, single factor VPN again, and then on the internal network, found a company all file share. And a lot of companies, right, if they need one server that everybody can use, that's how it starts. So on this company all share, HR was keeping a history of every employee and every contractor who had ever worked for the company. And that history included name, mailing address, bank account number, social security number, phone, spouse, everything that HR needed to know in order to do their jobs. This contractor account had access to all of that. Shouldn't. But it was just that one set of credentials that we needed to help us get that level of information. So how do you defend against this? Every organization should be doing OSINT gathering already. If you're trying to defend your own network, OSINT gathering should be part of your defensive controls. But the cool thing about your own network is you're allowed to run scans, right? Get approval, coordinate it with the people who expect to see that traffic, right? If your scan is going to set off alerts or notify a security team, server team, you want them to know what you're doing before you do it. But run the scans. OSINT is going to be dated and inaccurate. If you collect OSINT in an organization, you can count on about 80% of it being legit, but you're going to get information about servers that aren't online. You're going to get information that isn't useful. Scans, active scans with credentials, that's real current useful information. And if you find a weakness, you find a vulnerability, you can fix it before somebody else finds it and takes advantage of it. You'll also, again, simplicity does so much in terms of helping people do security. Just reduce your attack surface. If you find non-production systems on the internet that somebody stood up for testing, take them offline. Put them behind a firewall and then only open up certain IPs, or put them behind an intranet, make people log in before they can access that. There are so many ways you could pull that stuff back so that people can still legit do what they need to do, but the people who shouldn't have access can't get to it, can't see it. Closed network ports, go through all your files, run those OSINT gathering tools that look at metadata, and any file that's out there that does need to be out there, right? Marketing creates all these PDFs, whatever. If it needs to be out there, just sanitize the metadata and then upload the sanitized file, right? Don't give the attackers a chance to grab that data, just take it out and then put the file back so everybody can use it. Inactive accounts and unnecessary privilege, turn all that off. Multi-factor, all the things. Who uses multi-factor for their email? Yeah, if you're not doing it today, give it a go. Because like I use Google Authenticator, Duo, I played around with Authy. There are a lot of ways to put two-factor. Even like my Facebook account has a super little app within Facebook, or like a 6-digit SMS. The SMS two-factor isn't the best, but it's better than nothing. I have a Twitter account that I stood up tied to a website that contains information on how to get jobs in information security, IT security career. And I let the account go because I update it and turn it off and update it and turn it off. It depends on what I'm doing, whether or not I've got time to get into that. I turned the account on, I added some new content to the website, and I was auto-tweeting about the website to help people find the content. And my daughter and I were in the kitchen making dinner, and I got a notification on my phone from Twitter. Hey, Jerod, we just noticed that you logged in from Malaysia. Was this you? Well, no, Twitter. As a matter of fact, it was not me. Thank you for letting me know. When I turned the account back on, I didn't turn two-factor on. I got two-factor on everything else, but I hadn't used this account in years, and it was before I got on the two-factor bandwagon. And it didn't take the attackers 2 weeks of that account being active again to say, hey, this account's doing things. Let's go after it. And they took it over for 5 minutes. But two-factor all the things. And then security awareness training. Tell people corporate email is for corporate email. Does anybody know the website ashleymadison.com? Yeah, very public data breach about this site where people go to have extramarital affairs. The number of accounts in the data breach that were corporate email accounts, it was in the tens of thousands. And if you're trying to be discreet and have an affair on the side, firstname.lastname@company.com, that is not a way of hiding your identity. So teach people not to use corporate email for personal sites, show them the social quizzes, reset their passwords, tell them the answers to their secret questions. Even if you don't do it on the website, just say, hey, did you grow up on such and such street? You're not using that for a secret question answer, are you? Teach them that, and then teach them how to detect and respond to social engineering attacks. We should never go back to the attacker, right? The traditional end user should always go to IT or security when they think something is up. Never engage the attacker, because that's how catfishing schemes, that's how they work. And then I'm a big fan of admin privileges. Does anybody know what the tool LAPS is? Right? If you haven't heard of this, Local Administrator Password Solution. Did I get that right? Yes. It's a Microsoft utility that is 100% free that will change the default password for all the admin accounts on all your Windows boxes. So whatever you've got, if you've got one password on every box, if the attacker gets that hash, they now have the ability to jump to any box on your network. But if every box has a different password, has a different hash, they can't do it. LAPS is a free way to get around that. And if you're using accounts that have administrative privileges, ideally keep that separate from your regular day-to-day account. If users are using a network account to check email and to browse the internet, right? Those are two attack vectors that criminals are going to go after to get after these users. That should be a lower privilege account. Higher privilege accounts need to have multi-factor tied to the accounts. They need to have more complex passwords. And they need, ideally, keep those passwords in a vault somewhere. But tighten up admin privileges. And then take a look at your detective controls. All the passive OSINT gathering, that's not going to trigger any alerts. But as soon as the attackers start to take action, right, you can even set up a password spraying check to say, hey, if I see a series of accounts from different people fail to log in over a short period of time, chances are someone's using password spraying. That's a pattern that we can recognize. Build that into your detective controls so that you know when people are doing this, and you can either black hole their IP, maybe toy around with some honey creds and figure out a way to lure them in and get more information about them. Pay particular attention to all the privilege stuff. If an attacker gets on a box, the first thing we're going to do is go after either a local administrative account or a domain administrative account, because privilege gets me more things. I'm not going to piss around after one other user account. I want something that's got the ability to create and delete system objects. So look at those changes to who's in the domain admin group, right? Who's got local admin? And if you see any changes there, that should involve the security team right away. This Zeltzer.com, Lenny Zeltzer, security guy, a number of years ago, he wrote these cheat sheets. If you have no idea what to be looking for in building out these logging and monitoring tools, he's already figured it out for you. He's given you enough information to go out and say, I want to look for these codes on a web server. I want to look for these messages on network devices. Zeltzer.com, look at his cheat sheets. If you're not the one doing the logging and monitoring, you definitely want to put these in the hands to say, hey, are we looking for all this stuff? Because it maps really well with his incident review. He's got another cheat sheet that's incident response related. Oh, and then the last thing I'd recommend, embrace misdirection. You've heard of honeypots, right? A server that looks too good to be true. It doesn't just have to be at like the server level and the port level. You can create honey tokens, fake passwords that don't exist in your network, fake hashes. And then if you build these canary tokens, any of these honey creds, honey whatever, Matt has a lot of great stuff on active defense. Yeah, see you smiling over there. You've got a lot more detail on this. When you build those values into your incident response system, you're looking at a 100% positive hit. If the only way somebody is going to go to this web page, use this set of credentials, try to access this port, the only way is if they found it as part of the honey token, whatever, then chances are they're already on the internal network, and now I can pinpoint them. But I know if I get an alert in my SIM, it's not a false positive. That's definitely somebody doing something they shouldn't. So closing it out, basic stuff, folks. End of the day, we look at all the fancy stuff that we do in security and all the complexity. It can be overwhelming. The basic blocking and tackling is going to make the difference. Equifax, when they had their data breach, it was a missing patch on a Windows server. They have a security team. They have patch management processes. They just weren't doing it well. They were doing a lot of stuff, but they were leaving internet-facing servers exposed. We had that when Heartbleed and Shellshock dropped. There was a lot of activity where people knew they needed to patch stuff and just didn't get around to it. There are a lot of frameworks out there. NIST has a cybersecurity framework. I used the ISO 27000 framework back in my corporate and consulting days. 853 FSMA is part of NIST. There are a lot of people who have figured out what those basics are. Even if you just start with the CIS, critical, what is it? Center for Internet Security Critical Controls. It's like 20 things you ought to do. Take a look at one of those and say, are we doing all of these? And that's going to help you get ahead of some of the stuff we've just talked about here. And then here's, again, that's links to where you can find some of my classes. I use SlideShare. I do have a version of this deck out on SlideShare. So you can see that. I've also got one that I did. I did a short 1-hour talk in Columbus at a conference on OSINT gathering. That one's out on YouTube. Highly, highly recommend. Learn OSINT gathering now and start applying it. It's not just useful, but it's fun. It's enjoyable. But links to all the things that I think that you might find useful and helpful. Enough of me talking. Any questions, discussions, comments about anything we just covered? Yeah?
How did you source those basebins?
I'm sorry?
Earlier you mentioned that you can find a lot of data from those basebins. How did you find the sources on those?
Oh, thank you. How did I find the sources on Pastebin? I search by domain name in double quotes. So if you're targeting a company, I don't know, what is this? Jimmy's11, right? .com, whatever. If you're targeting a company, put that in double quotes in the search field. The double quotes refine the results enough, hit or miss. But that's how I'd start. But it's all just searching on different parameters that you think are going to be relevant. I've tried the @ symbol, but a lot of search engines will filter out the @ symbol. They don't want us searching for email addresses. But the domain name will get you what you're looking for. Good question. Other questions? Well, folks, this is me, right? Look familiar. These are all the ways to get a hold of me. LinkedIn is the best. If you want to hit me up, if you have questions about this stuff, if you're trying this out and you get stuck, definitely just talk to each other. That's what the community does. So I got one more. Yeah. I appreciate your time today, so thank you very much.